In this video, I want to talk about my attempt to get to grips with what God, a higher being, or whatever you want to call it, might look like. The notion of a higher power is somewhat contradictory in that most religions depict a God as unknowable and lacking a physical form, yet also create numerous different images of it. The reason they do this is because the human brain is simply unable to comprehend the unknown, and therefore seeks to represent the unrepresentable. In the first video I did on this channel, I spoke about my belief that God is a tulpa or thought form that thought itself into existence in an intense blast of self-belief. I've also previously outlined how I came to think this, which was by this being communicating with me during a near-death experience, and explaining that we're all essentially just thoughts in its subconscious mind. I've left a link to these videos in the description. This is directly relevant to the fact that so many people have tried to depict God, as it suggests that belief is currency and that is capable of giving rise to a corresponding reality. This notion is expressed in various different religious beliefs. The syncretic religion of theosophy entails the perspective that astral, spiritual or mental constructs held by numerous people give rise to permanent characters when held for long enough. Some branches of Hinduism believe that the world is Vishnu's dream, further cementing the idea of a firmly held image of what could be, giving rise to it actually coming to be. The idea of God's thoughts giving rise to actual real-world events is also present in Christianity and Judaism, further indicating that belief can become concrete. With this in mind, the fact that there are common characteristics to all the gods of all the world's religions clearly has some relevance, as it suggests that these attributes are being applied to the being that created us through sheer force of belief. Using the logic that the truth in religious scriptures lies not in any single faith, but in the elements of congruence between large numbers of belief systems, I've used AI to create a composite image of the gods of 156 different religions. My intention was to drill down to a meta-god, the divine essence that permeates throughout all faiths and shows what God might look like. I've left out the Muslim God due to a desire to avoid offending religious sensibilities, and also sadly because including it might put me at risk from the minority of extremists within this faith. I started off compiling the list of religions to include based on which had the most followers, but wanted to include the gods of as many faiths as possible and couldn't find figures for them all, so I ended up just including as many as I could find. For religions with multiple gods, I used whichever one is indicated as the most powerful. In some religions there is no specific hierarchy amongst the gods, so I chose to create a god in those instances. This actually took a huge amount of time to research, and I spent far longer on it than I really intended to because it was so fascinating learning about religions I hadn't known existed, and the various different conceptualizations of a higher power. The images I used were all from either established spiritual texts or academic texts so as to only draw upon official interpretations. And here's the end result for you. Numerous different faiths had gods that weren't humanoid, and some were just bright lights or animals of some sort. When combined together, they ended up looking like the strange being you see before you. There are a couple of salient points about this. Firstly, all the arguments about what race God is are apparently pointless, and the fact that the combination of all these different perspectives on God isn't even human suggests that deep down everybody knows that he transcends the typical human physical form. Secondly, God is somewhat ugly. This figures as the creature that created all of this is A, far removed from any modern beauty standards as it predates them by eons, and B, in many ways the antithesis of vanity, and therefore in no way intent on coming across as aesthetically pleasing. Nevertheless, this being still manages to have a certain grace and radiance to it, with a kindness emanating from the image. Given that God is portrayed in a lot of religions as having taken a human form at one point or another, I also created another composite image. this time excluding all of the non-human conceptualizations of deities. This is what I ended up with. As can be seen, God is nothing special in terms of aesthetics. He's relatively old, not particularly well dressed, and by no means anything amazing to look at. However, he still somehow manages to look infinitely wise and compassionate. His ethnic makeup is also ambiguous, again demonstrating the fact that race and nationality are essentially meaningless to him, and that all that really matters is our shared humanity. I then decided to create a composite image of the equivalent of angels in various different faiths. It's surprising how many different religions have something that vaguely equates to them, spiritual beings that work under God for the good of man. This androgynous being was the outcome, perhaps dispelling the stereotype as angels as being female. Next, I created composites of heaven and hell. Some religions have multiple different layers of heaven and hell depending on how good or bad a person has been, or various other elements. In these cases, I used images of the highest level of heaven and the lowest level of hell. I personally believe that heaven and hell are purely metaphorical and represent states of mind rather than physical planes, but thought this would provide an insight into the commonality between the different faiths in terms of how they view pleasure and suffering. This image here shows heaven. As can be seen, it's relatively straightforward. Just a picturesque natural landscape with the sound of a running stream nearby. This suggests that most people's view of perfection is actually just peacefulness and a connection with nature. This image shows the composite meta hell. At first glance it doesn't look too bad, but then imagine being the solitary figure on the rock. It's impossible to communicate with any other human beings and he's essentially stranded there alone. It's dark, misty and lonely. Perhaps pure isolation like this is true hell for most people. I hope you've enjoyed this video and that it's given you something to ponder about the points of similarity between the various different religions. In the next video, I'll be looking at something different, the concept of the egg ghost, a faceless apparition present in myths from various different parts of the world that can inflict death or disease on those who encounter it. I hope you continue to join me on my journey.